Montreal hearings for the Energy East pipeline have now been shut down over complaints against some of the National Energy Board members that are overseeing the process and a handful of protesters. The members are under fire for meeting with former Premier Jean Charest that was actually working with TransCanada at the time of that meeting. The board says that they made an honest mistake in not knowing this information and have now released a statement explaining the halt to the hearings is the result of a violent disruption and that there are legitimate concerns over security and safety, and also due to motions being filed for the accusal of the two panel members that met with Charest. As many of you have heard and seen, a group of really unruly protesters barged into the first session held in Montreal and charged the table in which the panelists were seated. The protesters were then arrested, and the hearing didn't even take place, even when outspoken critic and astronomical hypocrite Denis Coderre was first up to present. Outspoken anti-Energy East interveners, Coderre included, protesters and environmental groups all say that they simply can't count on commissioners from the NEB to be impartial. But let's take a look at the timeline of convenience and the affiliations of these not-so-secret agents, shall we? First of all, Coderre has been vocal against the pipeline since it even became a thing. And it's not about the environment for him. We're talking about a guy that released 8 billion liters of untreated sewage into the St. Lawrence River with Minister of Catastrophic Climate Change, Catherine McKenna's permission. I can't even make this stuff up. For Coderre, it's about the benefits and what he can get out of the pipeline, and basically nothing is good enough. He's even said so himself and is clearly using the meeting between the panelists and Charest as an excuse to push his own agenda. And remember when I told you about Catherine McKenna and Minister of Natural Resources Jim Carr revamping and reviewing the National Energy Board? Well, here's the perfect diversion to implement their plan. Halt the process, deem two panelists biased, send in the replacements, and implement the new rules. They'll give us their usual line about public confidence, but we all know that's just a ruse to get their accomplices in there to get their way and stop pipelines. The most ridiculous thing of all is that they cry foul on the NEB to appoint their own friends to positions of authority. Let me break it down. I mentioned earlier that motions were filed against two NEB panel members. Well, surprise, surprise. One of the environmental groups that filed, Environmental Defense, is actually being funded by the Friends of the Greenbelt. You might recall that Catherine McKenna appointed chair of that organization, Rod Northey, to the NEB Environmental Review Panel. And the executive director of Environmental Defense, Tim Gray, is one of Rachel Notley's Oil Sands Advisory Group panelists. Like I said, I can't make this stuff up. Keep in mind that many of these groups are funded using foreign money by groups that have special interests that include rallying against the Canadian oil and gas industry. And I know it's a crazy mixed up tangled web to keep up with when it comes to these eco-freaks. And you'd have to reach pretty far into the tickle trunk to buy into believing that a handful of protesters and a couple of fringe environmental groups have the pull to actually shut down Energy East hearings. There were hundreds of pro-pipeline union supporters outside that building that day, and there were thousands of ranchers that protested Bill 6, the farm legislation bill that Rachel Notley and crew drafted up out of thin air without consulting the people that it would affect. That didn't stop them from ramming it through. These environmentalists talk about catastrophic climate change. I talk about catastrophic levels of cronyism, all at a cost to the Canadian economy and way of life. The real takeaway here is that now that the Liberals and NDP have some sway, these processes will be stacked by all levels of government against pro-pipeliners using foreign cash and Liberal leverage. Expect the pipeline approval process to get a lot more difficult than it already is, because the fox is definitely in the henhouse. For the Rebel.media, I'm Holly Nicholas.
Thanks for watching. Click here to never miss a Rebel update. Want even more of the Rebel? Well, click here to become a premium member.